It had a delay, and I thought that they had gotten rid of it, but no. Okay, so um, objective for tonight is I have three mini techniques slash insights for Tefilah. One of which I had already said, but I don't remember if this was recorded. I remember I told it. I don't even remember what shiur it was in. It was just something I said. So I wanted to go over it because I had a good example of it. And then the remaining then I have two techniques that I am adapting from the book Radical Acceptance, which I've been talking about a lot. And then the third one is a long excerpt from Radical Acceptance, which is the main insight, which is the least certain of the insights that I kind of want to explore. And then after that, we can just talk about Tefilah or have Tefilah related question and answer. Okay. So the tip that I gave before, if you find yourself, first of all, premise here. I am a big proponent of the conservation of kavana approach to davening, of like save your kavana for the things that matter most, either philosophically or that you know are going to have the biggest impact on you. So default assumption, Shema Etre, Shema, I anything that I mentioned, like that's pretty much the only places I'm applying it to, for now. So one of the tips I said of if you find yourself davening mindlessly, then if you this is a weird way to say it. Listen to your own voice as though you're listening to someone else speaking to you. Okay. And for some reason, when I do that, I end up attending to the words much better. And I'm not saying talk to yourself, because obviously you're talking to Hashem, but listen to the words of your voice. So I slipped into a random instance of this is, I don't know if this is a New York thing or a Rockaway thing. You know how like apparently people hire leaf blowers every day? So I just started downing mint on my house, and like the moment I started, this loud leaf blower started blowing right outside of my window, and it was obnoxious. So I just raised my voice, and I found that I was talking at like this volume, and I found I like 5 or 6 or 7 brachos went by, and I'm like, oh, I'm paying attention to every word. And it's probably because I'm talking in a way where I'm like, I need to strain to listen to myself, So it's just like an extreme example of that. And then I lost kavana because I was thinking about the fact that I have kavana, which is always that's the rub, But then I also realized that maybe that's literally what Chazal are saying when they paskin that you have to say brachos and daven in a voice that you can hear yourself. Meaning, I think I always just thought of that as regulating how loud your volume was, but maybe it's a more intrinsic, like, uh, like, benefit to the. I haven't done a halachic analysis in that took in a while, but like that dafka when you are speaking at a voice where you're listening to yourself, then you pay attention more, So that's just a practical tip.
Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like I maybe a little bit subconsciously had a thing that I do that is like that, where when I'm davening, if I try to pay more attention, I'll like say in my head as if I'm telling someone these things.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, so that's closer to the actual thing in Tefilah, and the someone should be God, and that's the thing that I gave shiurim on at the very beginning of the year that I didn't return back to, but I feel like this discussion today is going to lead me back there. Is the idea that you alternate between addressing Hashem in the second person and the third person, But the second person thing is definitely like speaking to. I mean, the lashon that Chazal or the Mefarshim uses lashon nochach and lashon nistar. Nochach means the language of being present, meaning that God is present in front of you, that you're speaking to Him, and then nistar is that God is concealed. And so definitely like speaking to, and that is another channel that I will use sometimes, which is I will focus on the atah in the Baruch atah, and that will recenter me, because if you're talking to a real person, you don't tend to space out as much when you're talking to the person. When they're talking to you, it's different thing, But so if you say atah and you realize you are addressing a being, obviously, God's not being like we are anyway, but like that's the idea of using lashon b'nei adam. Then that could put you into that mode of like talking to a person, Yeah.
So that's point number 2.
That was all point number 1.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean it segued into some other points, but that was all point number 1.
Yeah. That was my question.
Yeah. I'll make a clear distinction.
Yeah.
Ready for point number 2? Yeah.
Ready for point number 2?
This is point number 2, and so this is the first thing from the book Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach. So I've been talking about this a lot on the Soju podcast, but the sacred pause. Okay, I'm not going to go into the whole thing what the sacred pause is now, but the basic idea behind it is I think it's almost a misnomer to call it a form of meditation, even though it can be viewed as that. It really is a impetus that is supposed to propel you into a state where you could be meditative. I don't know, meditative, right? I've never actually heard anyone pronounce that word. But the idea behind it is when you are, so she talks about it as though when you're going out about through life, just not at random points, but when it strikes you or intentionally planned ahead of time, pause and just let yourself think and feel. Okay. And it could be for a short amount of time, long amount of time, it could, and she extends the concept to like many things. Like she said, it could be for, a few seconds. It could be for a minute. It could be for an hour. It could be for a week where you like it could be for a year sabbatical, and the funny thing is, so I made an episode of the Stoju podcast from this past Monday about implementing the sacred pause when you leave your house and when you go back to your house at home, when you're by the mezuzah, to give yourself time to just think about the ideas you know about mezuzah and then let them impact you. Ironically enough, that has not happened once this week. I did it on Friday when I recorded the episode and hasn't happened a single time. I've forgotten about it. In theory, it's a good thing, and I'm still gonna keep trying. And then the funny thing is, I was talking it over with Jessie Fitchfine and saying that mezuzah thing, and she said, "Yeah, the sacred pause work, is like a very good way to frame stuff in Judaism." She said, "Nida is the sacred pause. Kashrus is the sacred pause." I'm like, "Oh, I didn't think about those applications." Yeah. But that's an example of like the longer sacred pause. So this happened by accident. I was in a very distracted state of mind, a lot of stuff going on in my head. Got to Shemona Esrei, stood up, and was so distracted that I knew I couldn't start it. So I waited, and then a split second later said, "I'm going to do a sacred pause right before I start Shemona Esrei." I paused for 2 seconds, and then I started it, and it was great. I mean, it was not even thinking about like specific ideas. It was more of the removing myself from the thoughts that were swarming around in my head, and then going to Shemona Esrei. And then when I realized that, that's exactly what the Rambam says for Kavana is Mafana libo mikol hamachshavos vira es atmukilo omer lifnei Hashchina. So it's a 2-step process to get Kavana. Empty your mind of all your thoughts, which again is not synonymous with the sacred pause. I'm not saying that sacred pause means empty your mind, but it does mean the first step to emptying your mind is not being in your mind, in like not being in, like in your emotions and thoughts, just stopping. And then you can go into the Shemona Esrei. And I'm not saying, again, like it was a wonder that 2 seconds, 1, 2, and then doing it helped. So like, and it does work in conjunction with Adoshem Sefasai Tiftach Ufia Gidi Lasaka, of asking God to open your mouth to declare his praise. That just recognizing that you can't just go into it, that you need to be in a state to be able to speak that, So that's another thing that I maybe I should only do one experiment at a time, but I'd like to put that on the list of experiments to try. So that was point number 2.
That was point number 2.
Yeah.
just recap.
Yeah.
Saying a pause like before you start davening, right?
Yeah, before you start Shemona Esrei. Yeah, before you start Shemona Esrei. Oh no, did I forget number 3? Oh no, I didn't. Okay, so the number 3. Number 3 I added on the way here. So another thing from radical acceptance. So the chapters are. So the concept of radical acceptance in general, the sacred pause is the act of radical acceptance in like a practicable form. But the idea of radical acceptance is to let yourself be with all of your thoughts and your feelings, And so she goes through different iterations or different applications of that. So one of them is radical acceptance of desire, okay, of allowing yourself to feel that you want something and to not be ashamed about it or embarrassed or feel needy or feel dependent or feel ridiculous, and that's a big thing that like people are not honest necessarily about like what they want, or like I think it's a very common thing as you get older, you're like, this is such a childish feeling, but like I want that, and they just kind of like push it away, and like that's not gonna help because that doesn't get rid of it. It just so I was thinking about that, and something in my mind was like, could this somehow be applied to Tefilah? And then I realized I think that there is I don't know about you guys, but when I put Bakashos in the Shemona Esrei, then there is sometimes a feeling that I have, I think because we anthropomorphize God, of like, I don't want to bother, or like I can't, like I have to like ask for only the important stuff, or like I like, this is not worth it to like ask. But what if Chazal, do you know the line from Chazal about like what you should ask for? I don't remember in if they say in Aramaic or Hebrew, but like kol ma shalibo chafetz, or like kol ma deliba bai, or something like that. Ask for everything your heart desires. And on the surface, you would think that that's. So I was always bothered by that, and I'll tell you how I did explain it. This is subpoint A, and then there's going to B. This is how I'll tell you how I used to understand that, and then how I'm understanding it now. The way I used to understand it is the basic idea of Tefilah, of Bakasha and Tefilah, is recognizing that all of our everything comes from God, and that He is Hakol Yafol, like He's omnipotent, and we should depend on Him for everything, and we've done this in Program of Tehilim, take our security from other people and from things in the world and attach them to God as recognizing He's the true source, right? Don't thank the hammer, right? So I thought that the idea of Chazal encouraging people to ask whatever their heart desired was basically a training wheels or a crutch, that you start off by asking God for everything heart desires. And then what Tefilah is supposed to do is, the act of Tefilah is lihith palel, to judge yourself. And part of the bakashos is really through asking God for things, you slowly start to see what really matters and what's really good. And then you refine your bakashos into something that's more mature. Okay. So that's still true. But what I thought is that I am past the stage of like asking God kol ma shalibo chafetz, like that's for babies, and now what I'm realizing, this is point 3b, what I'm realizing now is that maybe asking God for everything you want is a form of radical acceptance of desire. Because if you actually want it, that part of you is going to be yearning for it no matter what. So what are you doing with that part of you? If you section it off and like you only ask God for things that like are proper for you to ask for, like, and like are philosophically in line with God's, like system, like, so that's great. That part is great. And you should not do that. But what about all the other stuff that you want? You should acknowledge the desire. And the way Chazal are telling you to acknowledge the desire is to ask God for it. What are you gonna do? Just acknowledge it and then not ask God for it? What kind of like crazy thing is that? Now the answer to what kind of crazy thing is that is, well, what if it's crazy? Or what if it's just not, what if it's not right? Not like a thing that's worthy of asking. Like I remember a student, what was it? Yeah, student in Shall Have It. This is when Hamilton first came out, and she really wanted to go to Hamilton, and but she was in conflict because she was like, do I really put that in my Shemona Esrei? That seems petty. Like that's not the thing I should ask for. And I advised her. I said, ask, the Chazal you should ask for whatever your heart desires. And I did say like there is a way to frame it where you're elevating it, but being honest with what you ask. Like for example, I said, if you ask yourself, why do you want to see Hamilton? Or I'm going to use a different example. It's someone I know was obsessed with a video game. Okay. And it was getting to the point where it was like the need to beat the game was just distracting, So I can't remember, whatever. So we were talking about Tefilah, I think, and the simplistic way to ask is, Hashem, help me beat the game, right? Which feels petty, but the way to elevate it would be to say, help me to beat the game because I want to, and it will then free my mind to be involved in things that are more in line with the good, or more, more productive, whatever it is, So you're being honest. You're saying, I want to beat the game, but you're also then extending it to something that is actually in the framework of Torah and Tefilah. And again, the goal is to not, our Tefilah is not just an expression of feeling. That's part of it, but it is a self-reflection and self-judgment and a changing of the self, through the word that you say, So I felt that struck a good balance. And so what I'm saying here is like, if you want to win the lottery, like Chazal say you should ask for that, but that doesn't mean you just ask for that like a child and just not go further. There are ways to like augment it in ways that are realistic. And then what will eventually happen is you're not letting that desire like go by the wayside and attach to other stuff, which would be bad because you're not recognizing Hashem as the true source of good. You're channeling it to Hashem, but then you're also using tefillah. And what's going to happen eventually is like you'll start to have other realizations, like, do I actually need to win the lottery to be happy? Like, will that actually make me happy? And then that'll change in line with your maturity. Sure.
It seems to me like there might be, I don't know how, I mean, maybe it's not such a clear of stuff that you want. Like, there's stuff that you want that is like, it will make you happy in some emotional way. But then I feel like there could be something that you want where you think it's like really.
Yeah, I was wondering about that also. And we do end Tefilah, and I think this is kind of like the way they frame it is okay. Well, this is not a direct answer, but it's still relevant. Yihu laratzon imrefi v'hegon libi l'fanacha adashim tzuri b'goli is let the words of my mouth and the thoughts of my heart be favorable before you, Hashem, my rock and my redeemer. So like we do want our tefillahs to be in line with God's favor. Oh man, I think there is actually a tefillah written by you know what? If I can't find this immediately, then I won't look for it now. Hold on. Okay, so I can't find this immediately. So what I'm looking in is he has the bakasha at the end, and I think there is a good thing where he says that in a way that you can like hedge in a good way though. Gotta get past all these praises of God, he says at the beginning. Oh wait, yeah. Hold on. 16. Oh no. We should really analyze this. The only time I see this is between Mincha and Mariv and Yom Kippurim.
Huh.
Right, that's when we say we're no. That's when they have the handouts.
Yeah, remember that.
Yeah, maybe they have another one. Right.
Oh,
Yeah. Oh, not between Mincha and Mariv. Just while we're between Kol Nidre and Mariv, or between or before Kol Nidre, whatever.
I concept that on Yom Kippur.
Oh yeah.
But like there's another.
Okay, I can't find the line. So let me see if I could if what I'm about to say is in line with that. Okay, I feel here. I'll tell you what I would. If you have any ideas how to deal with that, like what happens if you want something, but like you think it might not be good for you, or you know it's not good for you.
I'd say like I would add in either like if I think it might not be good for me, then I might say like unless it's destructive for me, in which case like help me reroute my energies or something.
Right, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, I was thinking of it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say like if it's something that's like it's bad, like let's say it's or something
Yeah.
like that. You want a cheeseburger or something.
Yeah.
You can't daven for a cheeseburger.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, so
you can, but like I don't think
Yeah.
that it makes sense. But
Yeah.
like I would say it's not to daven for it, but maybe like Isaac's saying, ask to have your energies rerouted.
Yeah, so that's actually a good. I'm glad you brought up that case because I think there are things that are usher to daven for. So like the classic example is it's usher to have a tefillah shav, a tefillah that is impossible to fulfill, like changing the past, and even though I've never seen this outright, I think asking God for something that is definitively against His will, like halacha, is I don't think you'd be permitted to daven that way. So I think that's good. And I assumed your question was more in the realm of like stuff that's permitted but just might be harmful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So so one way is to ask for energies to be rerouted. Another way, I think, though, also, which might even be better, is to come to the recognition of what is good for you, such that you don't want this thing anymore. Because I feel like in terms of like rerouting your energies is a good practical thing. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with like asking about that, but it doesn't address the underlying cause of it, But if you can, it just like rechannels it, and like again, that's a great state to be in. But if you could realize that your desire to ask for it itself is misguided, and you realize that you're in conflict, and that you need help with that, that's like more in the realm of like the good and knowledge and and tshuva, I think.
Right. I feel like if you're being honest with yourself,
Yeah,
like
be honest. Yeah,
recognizing that you have the desire
yeah,
is far from not having the desire.
right. Yeah,
So like practically, while you still know that you have the desire, maybe it would be best to daven or
you're right.
something else.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, that's a good point. And that is the underlying thing and everything I'm saying here is like the being honest with yourself from the standpoint of that's how Tefilah works, is taking where you're at and then elevating it. And if you're not being honest and you're not taking it, then there's a disconnect. And from and that's again what led to the radical acceptance of desire. Like that's knowing where you're at is a thing. And maybe this is another thing. Okay, here's another thing, which I don't know if this is giving you, it's not us or what I'm about to suggest, but I don't know whether it's like proper. But let's say you find yourself in Tefilah and you have a desire for something that you know is like against Hashem's will or like is usher, maybe just like desire, accepting that desire, and then the act of not asking for it would be the way to engage in the institution of Tefilah in the correct way. Like not asking for like I feel like the normal route that I was saying before. Let's say you're asking for childish stuff, and then it becomes more mature, and then like you realize that the thing you were asking for itself, there's no need to ask for it anymore. It's job, and if you ask for something, that's like that's a higher level davening than the one where you're asking for something that was actually not good for you. So why should it be any different? It's just you're never asking for it in the first place. My only hesitance is having that thought and dwelling on it appropriate to the mentality of Tefilah. Not because it's inappropriate. I'm saying like is that part of the mindset of Lihis Palel or being Lifnei Hashem? I mean,
While you're davening.
yeah, while you're davening, yeah, because like where it is appropriate, Tshuva also has to be Lifnei Hashem, and we're doing Tshuva Lifnei Hashem, then that's 100% appropriate. But just in the mentality of Kavana and Omer Lifnei Shechina, I'm not sure.
Can I go back to the second?
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
like recognizing that your values are off in some way, right? So, you're saying that you would act in your tefillah to help you, like, get to better priorities, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now you might need to do that in a different bracha, meaning like, let's say, for example, you are in Barech Aleinu and you're asking to win the lottery, right? And then you realize that you have this insane desire to win the lottery, but like that's not good for you. So you want to ask Hashem to help you deal with that. I don't know if asking, I don't know. I honestly don't know if asking Hashem to assist you in having a more mature way to relate to your parnasa, if that bakasha belongs in Barech Aleinu or in Chonin Hadas, or some of, like, I don't know where that belongs. I mean, you could always put it in Shema Kolenu, but yeah. But I definitely think it is appropriate for tefillah, or in hashivenu, like for tshuva, yeah. Okay, right. Point number 4, which is the big point. Yeah, there were 4 points. Yeah, there's 3 small points and 1 big point. I shouldn't have introduced it that way.
I thought there were 3 points.
Oh yeah, no. This is the big one.
Number 4.
Yeah, thank you. All right, now, this might be. I hope this doesn't come across as not a good use of time, but the same reason that on the podcast when I went through the sacred pause, I read through the whole thing. So this is a subject that a subchapter she calls holding ourselves with compassion. Okay, and I'm not going to tell you where in Tefilah we're going with this. Okay, and this is a real world case. So she's a therapist, and so this is one of her cases. Actually, I don't know if this is in her therapy practice or in her meditation retreat. But we're going to read this, and then in the back of your mind, then like ask yourself where this might apply in Tefilah, and there might be more than one answer. Let me just share this on the screen. Okay, so she says like this. Oh, and so she introduced this guy earlier in named Daniel, who was, again, I forgot if this is a client, a student, whatever. When I asked Daniel how long he had been turning so harshly on himself, oh, he's very self-critical guy. He paused for several moments. He said it had been for as long as he could remember. He had joined his mother in relentlessly badgering himself from an early age, ignoring the hurt in his heart. As an adult, he treated his heart and body with impatience and irritation. Even in the face of a tormenting divorce and a long bout of chronic back pain, Daniel hadn't been able to acknowledge how real and intense his suffering was. Instead, he criticized himself for having screwed up the marriage and for not having the sense to take proper care of himself. I asked Daniel if he could tell me what happened in his body when he was judging himself. He pointed to his chest and said his heart felt bound by tight metal cords. Oh, and by the way, I want to introduce this with something. I mentioned I forgot if I mentioned this in person or in the chat, that that this insight relates to IFS, but I'm specifically going to not use IFS terminology. And you'll see, those of you who know IFS will see that I've said this ever since I started reading the book. She basically discovered IFS and is doing it, just not using this terminology. And okay, so he points to his chest and says his heart felt down by tight metal cords. I asked if he could feel that right in this moment. To his surprise, Daniel heard himself saying, this really hurts. I gently asked him how he felt about the pain in his heart. Sad, he responded softly, his eyes welling up with tears. It's hard to believe I've been carrying this much pain for so long. I suggested he put his hand on his heart, on the place where he felt the most pain, where he most felt pain. I asked if he might send a message to the pain. How would it feel for you to say, I care about this suffering? Okay, and that's an important line. Daniel glanced at me and looked down again. Strange, I think. I encouraged him to try to just whisper the words softly. As he did so, and then repeated the phrase slowly 2 more times, Daniel's shoulders began to shake with quiet sobbing. We've all felt the power of someone's care to melt our armor. When we feel upset, often not until someone cares enough to listen or give us a hug when we are we able to melt down and cry. When someone says to us, as Thich Nhat Hanh suggests, darling, I care about your suffering, a deep healing begins. We might quite readily offer such care to others, but we can learn to offer the same kind of gentle attention to ourselves. With the tenderness we might bring to stroking the cheek of a sleeping child, we can softly place a hand on our own cheek or heart. We can comfort ourselves with words of kindness and understanding. Offering ourselves such care might feel strange and unfamiliar at first, as it did for Daniel. Sometimes extending compassion to ourselves in this way feels downright embarrassing. It can trigger a sense of shame about being needy and undeserving, shame about being self-indulgent. But this revolutionary act of treating ourselves tenderly can begin to undo the aversive messages of a lifetime. Over the next few days, whenever Daniel became aware of judging himself or others, he would check into his body to see where he was feeling pain. Usually he would find his throat, heart, and stomach tightened in fear and his chest heavy and sore. With a very gentle touch, Daniel would place his hand on his heart and say, I care about this suffering. Because he was sitting in the front of the meditation hall, okay, so I guess this was at a meditation retreat, I noticed that his hand was almost permanently resting on his heart. One afternoon, Daniel came to tell me about something that had happened earlier that day in meditation. A scene had arisen in his mind of being at his mother's house, engaged in an angry exchange with her. As he tried to explain why it wasn't irresponsible for him to take a week off to meditate, he could hear her disdainful reply, "You lazy bum, why don't you do something worthwhile with yourself?" This was the same kind of demeaning message that in his youth had made him want to shrivel up and disappear. He felt his chest fill with the heat and the pressure of rage. In his mind, he heard himself shouting, expletive, expletive, you don't understand. You never understood. Can't you shut up for a moment and see who I am? Daniel could feel the pain of anger and frustration like a knife stabbing at his heart. He was just about to launch into a diatribe at himself for being such a wimp for not standing up to her and for being a meditator filled with such hatred. Instead, he placed both his hands on his heart and whispered over and over, I care about the suffering. May I be free from suffering. After a few minutes, the stabbing anger had subsided, and in its place, he could feel warmth spreading through his chest and a softening and an opening around his heart. Feeling as if the vulnerable part of him was listening and taking comfort, Daniel said, I'm not leaving you. I am here and I care. Throughout the rest of the retreat, Daniel practiced like this, and some of the painful knots, the wounds of his young, anguished self began to slowly to release. When he came in for his final interview, Daniel's whole countenance was transformed. His edges had softened, his body was relaxed, his eyes bright. In contrast to his former awkwardness and hesitancy with me, Daniel seemed glad to be there. He said that the judgments and self-blame had continued, but not with such unrelenting cruelty. No longer imprisoned by constantly feeling something was wrong with him, he was beginning to notice the world in new ways. Other students seemed more friendly. The acres of the forest were an inviting magical sanctuary. The Dharma talks stirred up a childlike fascination and wonder about how it all is. He felt energized and somewhat bewildered by the fresh sense of possibility in his life. By holding himself with a compassionate presence, Daniel was becoming free to participate more fully in his world. Because, like Daniel, we become so addicted to judging and mistrusting ourselves, any sincere gesture of care to the wounded places brings about radical transformation. Our suffering becomes a gateway to the compassion that frees our heart. When we become the holder of our own sorrows, our old roles as judge, adversary, or victim are no longer being fueled. In their place, we find not a new role, but a courageous openness and a capacity for genuine tenderness, not only for ourselves, but for others as well. Yeah, okay. So that's the real work case. Okay, so now before we talk about applications to Tefilah, I want to say what triggered this thought, which was later on she goes in. I don't know what she considers herself religiously. I feel like, I mean, she does a lot of Buddhist stuff, but she also draws upon a lot of Christian stuff and atheist. I think she describes herself as an atheist, maybe she was. So she, at one point in the chapter, she goes through prayers that she's heard from different groups that have had this effect, on the people who pray with them. And obviously, she didn't mention Judaism, but that got me thinking about Judaism. And then the other thing that led me to make this connection was okay, fine, I will go to IFS a little bit. In IFS, then one of the premises is that by witnessing the parts of you that are in pain and that have been shunted aside, that unburdens them. So that's what I have here. Now the question is, do you see how it could apply to Tefilah?
I mean, maybe it's too simple, but I was thinking like refining you. Like
interesting. Okay,
like,
why?
you're just like kind of, you're not the full like person that you could be when you're in these kind of places. And so, I mean, and people need help. Becoming, I guess who they could be and like sort of being healed in that aspect.
You're right.
The other one I thought of was phone in class.
Oh wow, okay, yeah.
Just because it's like the similar thing, you're kind of not able to think in the proper way. So yeah.
Okay, I definitely hear that. Anyone else? I'm gonna comment more on the Raffaello thing in a second.
I guess I was thinking more simplistically, maybe just that if you are putting what you want into words, like to prepare for Tefilah, then you're sort of like bringing yourself to a better place. But it doesn't really, maybe it doesn't stack up to what, like, let's say what this book was talking about. Like,
right. I mean, that's a good point, though. I mean, it is a good point. So what bracha is about your personal suffering? Because I think that was where your intuition came from. Re'ev anyenu. Okay, what are you asking God to see our suffering? Okay, and so when I read this and that chapter or that excerpt, and I thought, literally, what you're doing is you are asking God to see your suffering. And the premise behind all this, even though we don't say it in this particular bracha, is that God cares about our suffering. We say that in lots of other places. We say, I mean, Tehilim is filled with that message. But the first step of just like, asking God to see our suffering, like, is kind of, or should be predicated on the fact that we are seeing our own suffering, and if you do what she is saying when you are suffering, and or if you really want to do it, like right before you say this bracha, and you really just see yourself, and instead of saying, I mean, it's important for you to say, I care about the suffering, free me from the suffering, but seeing that God sees your suffering, and whatever it means that God sees or God knows, like, that's obviously on the one hand, lashon b'nei adam, that's specifically anthropomorphic and should have this effect on us that God is seeing our suffering. But on the other hand, we are saying something real, and even if we don't know what that means, like, the route to get to that reality is through like the lashon b'nei adam, So whatever it means, God sees your suffering and knows it in a way that's more real than your own knowledge. I mean, that's the whole idea also of Zichronos on Rosh Hashanah, of like, God knows everything about you and knows your thoughts and your innermost feelings. And we say this a lot. And just the experience of I mean, I feel like this is a big part of what it means to be Omer Lifnei Hashem, of being cognizant that you in your entirety are being seen by God. That's like a very, very, very parallel thing to the radical acceptance thing. But Eva Aninu specifically is you have this pain and suffering and saying to God, see it, and then Riva Rivenu, take up our cause, which means you're actually asking for God to help you out of it. Uga Alinu Mehera Laman Shemecha, redeem us immediately, and then this is where you elevate it for your namesake. I mean, that's connecting it back to the Torah's value system. It's not just, yes, we want to get out of pain, but it's for the sake of the Shem Hashem. Ki Goel Chazak Ata, because you are a powerful redeemer. Baruch Hashem Goel Israel. Blessed be Hashem, who is the redeemer of Israel. Oh, and by the way, I didn't say this premise because we've talked about it earlier in the year. I think a lot of people who just haven't thought about the brachos think that this bracha is about the redemption of the Jewish people. Totally not. All right, that, I mean, I don't want to say totally, but like the bracha about redemption of the Jewish people is Tekabel Shofar Gadol. That's Kibbutz Galuyos and all that other stuff. This is in the first half of Shemona Esrei, which is brachos that focus on the individual needs, you know. And then, so this is the bracha we were saying, and then what you said is relevant with Rafa'inu because that is healing. And if you listen to my Rafa'inu shiur that I gave a year and like 10 days ago, then I bring what I think are convincing rayas that the whole first half of the bracha is talking about psychological suffering, because that's what the psukim that is derived from say, you know, so it segues right into that also, you know. Interesting that it goes with the emotional suffering and then the psychological suffering, but that's, you have to learn the Gemara in Megillah about like why it's in that order, which I did prepare a shiur on. I think I gave the shiur this year. Yeah, so that's what I was thinking there. And really, this is for all your needs also. I mean, everything I said about desires and needs, like just the notion that God sees our suffering and knows our needs or hears our tefilah, like that's the idea also. Shema Kolenu. I mean, I know people have pointed this out before, but like nowhere in Shema Kolenu do we say that God is going to answer the tefillahs, you know? And we talk about Kabbalah's tefillah, you know? And I think I gave a shiur last year also, or Dvar Torah, about how Onkelos translates all the instances of God hearing tefillah to it was received, the tefillah was acceptable to God, you know. But like the emphasis is on the fact that our tefillah is being heard by God, you know. And again, I think that you have to have this. You don't have to, but having the self-knowledge, which is what tefillah is all about, and then the radical acceptance of not pushing away any of your feelings, and then saying, God, see my suffering, that's going to be a better tefillah than if you just say the words, God, see my suffering, like, and don't actually feel the suffering. Like being in touch with your own suffering and then asking God to see it, or not asking God, you are asking God, but you're also saying that God is the one who sees it, you know, and you're asking God to save you from it. I think that's going to be a much better kavanah. And then the small IFS point. I mean, this whole thing is IFS. And I mentioned this when we had a field talk earlier that wasn't really recorded. Flame shot on Yenu, our suffering collectively, Klal Yisrael. But when you say you're suffering, there are many, many parts of you that are suffering, you know? So I don't think it would be inconsistent to say ours as a collective, but then also ours as a collective in terms of all of your suffering parts, you know. But yeah, that's all I got. Good. I guess we don't have time for like a lengthy question, but we got like 4 minutes until Sharon's. If there are any questions or any comments or observations here. Okay, sorry, I'm gonna interrupt myself. This is something also that I feel like there's a lot of obstacles to getting good at tefillah, and I think one of the undersold obstacles is oh, you know what? Yeah, all right. Do I want to read this? Hold on a second. Yeah, I want to read this. One of the obstacles of tefillah, oh, my phone reset, is it should be painful. You know, like if you expect tefillah to be like a walk in the park, and like it's tefillah in many ways should be as painful as tshuva. You know, even though you're not working on it for time, but like it's, you know, it's self-knowledge, and all self-knowledge is is painful, you know, and like it's also about realizing like the whole bakasha thing is also realizing your dependency on God, your limitations, like how finite you are, and it's just like, you know, it's a painful thing. Fine. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I sent this in a chat to a couple people before. I guess this is not exactly relevant, but I'll say it anyway. This is this quote from James Clear: "There will never be a perfect time to do something that stretches you." That's true whether you are starting a business, having a child, and changing careers, or wrestling with any number of challenges. That's not a license to be reckless and never think things through, but at some point you have to embrace the uncertainty because it is the only path forward. If you were ready for it, it wouldn't be growth. So I think that's good life advice in general, but I think Tefilah is in many ways a stepping into the uncertainty in terms of yourself and your life. And if it's not hurting, then you might not be doing it. You know, I think, yeah. All right. On that note, let's end for today. All right. See you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.